By this point, we have configured a flat space in the metaverse. We've configured a cube that is rotating over itself in the metaverse. Now we're going to configure more 3D objects in this metaverse. To do this, we're going to go back to the Three.js JavaScript documentation. So you have the link, it's in your resources tab, and it'll take you here. From there, we will go to the documentation again, and in the search box, we will type geometry. Now, once we search for geometry, what we're going to get is all the various types of geometries that are possible with Three.js. We've already looked at the box geometry we've used, but there's others. There's circle geometry, there's cone geometry. Let's go to cone geometry, and what we're going to do now is we're going to be creating a cone using Three.js. Let's do that right now. So to make it really easy, let's just go ahead and take this code here. We're going to go back to Visual Studio to our code, and we're going to insert it. But before we do that, let's put some comments here so we actually know exactly where it is that we're going to create this cone, and we'll know exactly everything that we're creating. So what we're going to do now is we're simply going to create this line of code. Let me just take this comment right here, and I am going to make a geometric figure to be represented in the metaverse. Okay, perfect. So let me write that down. In this case, it's going to be a cube. We already established a camera position for this cube. So this camera position will have to be changed because we're actually going to be working with something different. So let's see how we're going to change that. Let's copy this line of code. We first did a cube, and the next one's going to be a cone. So now we know we worked with a cube. Now we're going to be working with a cone, which is a new one that we got. So we copy that first line of code and we insert it here within our cone. At this point, we've established the geometry for this specific figure. This figure is going to be a cone. So notice we're doing geometry cone. And now this cone, we're going to change the different variables for the dimensions of this cone. So now we need the next instruction, which will determine the material for this cone. So we need to copy this. We go back to Visual Studio and we're going to paste it in. Now we need to define that the variable is actually material underscore cone. We need to make sure that we don't mix geometry and the geometry cone, because if not, we will run into a which one is it? So we need these variables to be clearly defined that they are for a cone. That's why each of these variables will be defined as underscore cone. Now we are missing the last lines of code that are going to let us define the variable cone, where we mix the geometry and the material and we add it to the scene. So we copy it and paste it here. Now notice specifically we have to define the variable. We're going to be confining the geometry underscore cone and material underscore cone, which is the variables that we defined, see? And then we have this cone, which is added to the scene. So notice by this point, we've got the cube, we've got the cone, and now that we've saved it, this cone should also appear in the metaverse. So let's go there and oh, there we have it. There's our cone right there. So what's happening is that we're seeing that the cone is on top of the cube object we've already got. So by this point, we need to change the position so we can remove the cone from on top of the actual cube. So what I can do is I can actually change the position. And the way that I can do that is if I go here, cone position, and I can change that, set the position for this cone. So I'm going to define it as -10, 5, and 0. Okay? So let's see how that's going to look. We're changing the position of the cone. And what we see, now we have that the cone is separate from the cube. You see? Now the cone is at a different place in the metaverse from the cube that we've already got. And this way, we've already determined the exact position for this cone in the metaverse we're building. So by this point, we can change different things. For example, let's say we don't like the yellow. Let's change it to a different color. So instead of using this specific color for this material, we're going to change that. And we're actually going to use it, let's call it ED, let's see, what's a good one? 81 and 0A. So that's a good color, ED810A. And now we see a different color for this cone. You see, we no longer are the yellow. We chose a different color, and it's up to you. You can choose whatever you want. Let's say we want to change the material. Instead of actually calling it basic material, let's change it to Fung material. So it's the same exact material as the cube. So now what we have is we got Fung material, and it doesn't really have that much change, even though it's a different material. Let's see what happens if we start rotating this cone. So let's add here cone.rotation, and then we are going to be rotating it on, let's not do Z, let's do x-axis. X-axis plus or equal 0.01. Let's see how this is going to work. And let's add another axis to rotate on. Instead of x, let's rotate on y. Now, we're rotating on both the x and the y axis, and they're going to be increasing by 0.1 in both of the different axes. So you see, now we're rotating not only in the x-axis, but the y-axis. And you can see how the lights are reflecting on the Phong material that we have. So by this point, what we have is we have this cube that's actually rotating on several axes, and we've got a cone that's actually rotating in multiple axes. Now, we don't have to just create a cone. We can create other objects. As you saw, we have many other objects. For example, let's try cylinder. So if I go back to the code and I choose the cylinder geometry here, I've got the code, and I'm going to go back to our source code. And in here, I'm going to paste the code, and then let me leave the comments here, and I'm going to label it here as cylinder, because that's what we're creating. So we have a cube, we've got a cone. This is actually our cylinder, okay? So we're going to change the geometry. Instead of actually being geometry, it needs to be geometry underscore, and we're going to change it to a cylinder. The material, we have to change it for the cylinder as well. And now we're going to start changing. We've got the cylinder geometry. So you got geometry underscore cylinder, material underscore cylinder. So now we've defined the geometry cylinder, material cylinder, and we're mixing them together in the variable cylinder. So now we're going to look at the position of where we're actually going to place this cylinder. And there it is. This cylinder is right in the middle on top of the cube that we have. Let's change where it's placed so we can actually establish where it is. So right now, what we're going to do is we are going to establish the cylinder position. We're going to set it in a different position altogether. It's going to be 20, 5, 0, okay? But I also noticed that the cylinder is way too big. So let's change the size of the cylinder by defining different size. So here, 5, 5, 5, 32. Let's see what it looks like. Okay. Now we have a cylinder in a different position, in a completely different space with a smaller size. Now what we want to do is we want to be able to match the other specific objects. So let's do that. First, let's change the material. Let's go back to Phong. So right now we're creating a cylinder in Phong material, and let's change the color as well. Instead of using the color that we had before, let's just go ahead and instead of using yellow, we can go back to our color picker and let's choose custom color. Let's see right around here. That blue is really beautiful. Let's copy this. And then we go back right now and we're going to replace the color right there. Okay, perfect. Now we will have a blue cylinder. Ooh, there's a beautiful blue cylinder. Okay, so by this point, we've got the floating cylinder on the plane in blue. Now we need to start rotating it in very similar ways that we did with the other ones. So how do we do that? Well, let's choose right now here in the function animate. Let's go cylinder rotation. Let's define X, and it's going to be rotating by 0.05. Just in one axis. Let's see how it looks. Interesting. So right now the X is just rotating in one axis, the X axis. Okay? So by this point we have three objects that are located in space. We have a plane, and they're all rotated in different areas within the metaverse that we have created. Okay? So by this point, you've already created 3 figures in the metaverse, and all you need to do is go back to the documentation and you can create others. Whether you want to create a polyhedron or a sphere or a tube, all of these are available for you. You can simply just go there and you'll see even all the instructions on how to modify the various aspects for the different shapes that you're creating within the metaverse.